Kane. He'd raise her wages twice without being asked, because she was, without argument, the best camp cook he'd ever fed 40 men on, and both times she'd thanked him plainly and gone straight back to sleeping on a cot in a hayloft above the horses, in a Montana spring that still froze solid most nights. He could not work it out. A woman who fed his whole outfit like she was cooking for family, who doctored a burned hand or a fevered brow as readily as she turned out biscuits, and who apparently would not spend $1 more on her own comfort than the absolute minimum survival required. He decided by April that she was simply the most stubbornly frugal person he'd ever employed. He was wrong about the word frugal. The word he was actually looking for was devoted, and it would take a sick child and a desperate letter before he understood the difference. The Kane outfit ran cattle on 11,000 acres of good Montana grass, and every spring during Roundup, Marcus Kane fed 40 hands out of a chuck wagon and a cook's tent that Bertie Calloway ran like a small, exacting kingdom. She was 34, a widow herself. Her husband Daniel had died in a mine collapse 8 years back, before they had children of their own, and she cooked for outfits up and down that stretch of territory the way some women taught school or took in wash, because a widow without land needed a trade, and Bertie Calloway's trade happened to be extraordinary. 40 men ate better under her hand than most of them had eaten at their own mother's tables. She earned, by the standard of camp cooks in that territory, a genuinely fair wage. She spent almost none of it on herself. The hands noticed, the way hands notice everything about the one woman in camp. Some of it was kind noticing. She doctored blisters and fevers without being asked twice, kept coffee going at all hours for night guard, remembered which of the younger boys got homesick, and slipped them a second helping of pie without comment. Some of it was less kind. Cletus Ryan, a hand with more mouth than sense, had taken to calling her barn bridie behind her back, on account of the cot in the hayloft and the same 2 dresses she wore in rotation all season, and the general theory among the less generous hands that she was simply tight-fisted by nature, a woman who'd rather sleep with horses than spend $1 on her own comfort. Marcus Kane had put a stop to the name, calling the one time he heard it directly. He had not, at the time, been able to explain why it bothered him quite so much. What none of them knew, what Bertie Calloway had told exactly no one in 3 years of cooking for outfits across that territory, was where nearly every dollar of her wages actually went. Her younger sister Constance had married a miner named Ezra Doss in 1880, and the two of them had built a small, hard life together up near Butte, and had 4 children in 6 years, and had died within a week of each other in the spring of 1883, when a shaft collapse took Ezra outright, and the same week's grief and exhaustion took Constance to a fever she'd had no strength left to fight. 4 children, the eldest 10, the youngest not yet 2 at the time. No bloodkin left who could take all 4 together, which is a thing that had nearly broken Bertie's heart worse than the deaths themselves. The very real, very common frontier prospect of 4 siblings scattered to 4 different households, or worse, an orphan asylum that would separate them on principle. Bertie Calloway could not take 4 children onto a ranch cook's wandering seasonal work. She knew that plainly, without self-pity, the way she knew most hard facts. What she could do was pay. She found a family in the town near Butte, the Prentices, decent if strict, willing to take all 4 children together for a monthly boarding fee that was, by the standard of camp cook's wage, considerable. She had been paying it, without missing a month, for 3 years. It meant a barn instead of a boarding room. It meant 2 dresses worn in careful rotation instead of new ones. It meant every raise Marcus Kane offered her went into an envelope addressed Butte instead of anywhere near her own comfort. She had never once, in 3 years, considered any of a sacrifice. It was simply arithmetic. Her nephews and niece, kept together, cost exactly what it cost. The letter came on a Tuesday in May, carried out to the Roundup camp with the regular mail, and it found Bertie at the chuck wagon in the middle of supper for 40 hungry men. She read it standing by the fire, and Marcus Kane, close enough to see her face change, though not close enough yet to read the letter over her shoulder, watched the color go out of her entirely in about 4 seconds. Mrs. Calloway? It's nothing, Mr. Kane. Family matter. It was, by any honest reading of her face, considerably more than nothing. She finished serving supper with hands that were not quite steady, and Marcus Kane, who had learned a great deal about Bertie Calloway's competence and almost nothing about her actual life in an entire spring of working alongside her, understood that something had just broken through a wall she'd built very carefully. He found her an hour later at the edge of camp, the letter still in her hand, and he did the thing he'd wanted to do for weeks and never once found an excuse for. He simply asked, "Whatever it is, Mrs. Calloway, I'd like to help, if help's wanted." She looked at him a long moment, weighing 3 years of careful privacy against whatever the letter had just told her, and something in her, exhaustion or fear or simple relief at finally being asked directly by someone she'd come to trust, let the wall down. "My sister's youngest," she said, "Ezra Jr. He's took a fever bad, and the family looking after him and his brothers and sister says the doctor won't come again without payment in hand, and I haven't got it, Mr. Kane, not till the season pays out. And I can't get a Butte from here in under 2 days riding hard, and I don't know that he's got 2 days." Whose children?" Marcus Kane asked gently, because the sentence had raised more questions than it had answered. She told him. Then, the whole of it, 3 years compressed into perhaps 10 minutes, standing at the edge of a cattle camp in the last light of a Montana evening. Constance, Ezra Doss, the shaft collapse and the fever that followed it within a week, for children with no one left who could take all 4 together. The Prentice family in Butte, decent people, paid faithfully, month after month, out of a camp cook's wages that could have bought her a proper room and new dresses, and a life considerably easier than a hayloft cot. "The barn suits me fine," she said again, the same sentence she'd given him 4 times at spring about the ranch house room, except this time, finally, with a reason attached. "Every dollar I don't spend on comfort is a dollar those children keep having a home." Marcus Kane understood, standing there, exactly what word he'd been missing all season. He did not make a speech about it. That was not his way, and it was not, as it happened, what the moment needed. "Saddle 2 horses," he said. "We'll ride tonight. I'll have the doctor there before you would riding alone, and I'll cover whatever's owed, and you can pay me back out of wages at whatever pay suits you, or not all, and either way we're leaving within the hour." "Mr. Kane, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," he said. "I offered 4 times this spring, and you turned me down on a room I could well afford to give you. I'm not asking this time either." They rode through the night, changing horses once at a line camp, and reached Butte by the following noon, considerably faster than Bertie could have managed alone. Ezra Jr., 6 years old, fever-flushed and frightened, was, by the time the Dr. Marcus paid for arrived and did his work, go to live, though it took 3 more days of careful nursing to be entirely certain of it. Bertie sat with him those 3 days in the Prentice family's front room, and Marcus Kane, who had a ranch and 40 hands and a roundup half-finished waiting for him, found reasons to stay all 3 days too, which he made no particular effort to explain, and nobody particularly asked him to. He met all 4 children properly for the first time in that sick room. Nora, 10, watchful and protective of her younger siblings in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of an aunt he now understood a great deal better. Sam, 8, Delia, 5, and Ezra Jr., small and pale in his bed, gripping his aunt's hand through the worst of the fever's 3rd night with a strength that surprised everyone in the room. They're fine children," Marcus said, on the ride back toward the ranch, once the fever had broken and the immediate crisis had passed. "They are," Bertie agreed. "Constance's whole heart, all 4 of them. You've been paying for this alone. 3 years. Somebody had to. There's 4 of you working that arithmetic," Marcus said. "You and me, apparently, as of last week, and I expect there's 40 hands back at camp who would chip in a week's wages apiece if they knew the half of what I now know, Cletus Ryan very much included, once I've had a word with him about that nickname." Bertie laughed for the first time in 3 days, tired and real. "I've managed alone a long while, Mr. Kane. I noticed," he said. "I'd like that to change, if you'll let it." He put the offer to her plainly, over the following weeks, without pressing, because pressing, he understood by now, was precisely the wrong tool for a woman who built her entire adult life around asking for nothing. There was a small line cabin on Kane land, near enough to the main house to be practical, standing empty since the last hand who'd used it moved on. He offered its apprentice children, all four of them, rent-free, on his own land, with Bertie close enough to see them daily instead of once or twice a year between seasons. He offered more carefully, considerably more nervously than he'd offered anything else that spring, to help raise them alongside her, which was his way of saying a great deal more than the sentence itself contained, and which Bertie Calloway, 3 years accustomed to carrying everything alone, took a full week to properly answer. I've spent 3 years telling myself I needed nothing I didn't strictly have to have, she told him, that week, sitting on the porch of the cabin that would soon hold 4 children who'd never once, in 3 hard years, had a proper home of their own. I got so good at needing nothing, Mr. Kane, I nearly forgot how to want something instead. And now I find I want a great many things I hadn't let myself consider in some while. She looked at him plainly, the way she looked at very little in 3 careful years. You among them, if I'm honest about the whole account. Marcus Kane, who had offered her a proper room 4 times at spring and been refused 4 times without once understanding why, understood everything now, all at once, the way a man understands a ledger the instant somebody finally shows him the missing column. The children moved to Kane land that summer, all 4 of them, into a cabin that got a proper stove and real beds within the week, paid for out an account Marcus opened without telling Bertie the total of it, which she discovered later, and scolded him for extravagantly and never once asked him to undo. Cletus Ryan, informed plainly and without cruelty of exactly whose fever had been paid for by a camp cook's careful hail-off years, retired the nickname Barn Bridie permanently, and by autumn was building Ezra Jr. a small wooden horse out of scrap lumber in his off hours, which the boy kept for the rest of his childhood. Bertie kept cooking for the outfit that season and every season after, though she moved, finally, into a proper room, not out of ranch house's spare quarters, as it happened, but into a house of her own building by the following spring, one with 4 children's worth of bedrooms in it, and a kitchen considerably better equipped than any chuck wagon. Marcus Kane married Bertie Calloway that autumn, in a ceremony at the ranch that all 40 hands attended, plus the Prentice family, plus most of Butte's mining community who'd known Constance and Ezra Doss, and had wondered, quietly, over 3 years, what had become of their 4 orphan children. What had become of them? The whole territory learned that autumn was this: an aunt who'd slept in a barn for 3 years, so 4 siblings could stay together, and a rancher who'd finally understood, watching her do it, that the word he wanted for a woman like that had never once been frugal. Nora stood up as a witness at the wedding. 10 years old going on considerably older, the way children who've had to be responsible too young often are. Ezra Jr., fully recovered, spent most of the ceremony trying to catch grasshoppers in the churchyard grass, and was gently corrected twice. There's a line cabin still standing on Kane land, though it's a tool shed now. The family long since moved into a proper house, and generations of Kane grandchildren have been told, growing up, exactly why their great-grandmother once slept above the horses in a Montana hayloft rather than spend $1 she didn't have to on herself. The story gets told the same way every time, ending on the same sentence, because it's a sentence that actually explains the whole of it better than any account of barns or wages or a rancher's slow understanding ever could. She wasn't frugal. She was 4 children's whole reason for getting up every single morning, and she have slept in the snow itself before she let that arithmetic come out $1 short.